Thousands of years ago, way before the War of Zeta Halo, humanity was a thriving civilization that was so far in advance of what it is today. Colonizing planets all over the Milky Way galaxy, humanity was on a whole new level of technological achievement, forming alliances with other species to strengthen their planets and forces. However, after encountering a terrifying foe on the edge of their galaxy, humanity was suddenly forced to flee from their own colonized space, as this form of powder took over their planets. But this escape only led to further problems, as an even more advanced species known as the Forerunners saw this as over-aggression and started hitting back at humanity, forcing them into a new war. But what happened leading up to these events? What was this powder and what exactly did it do? And what were the events of the Human-Forerunner War, and how did it affect the course of history for humanity and the galaxy? Well, in today's video we look back to over 100,000 years ago, where humanity was once thriving, and explore the end of their technological age. These are the events of the Human-Forerunner War. The year was around 150,000 BCE, and humanity, or what we would know now as the prehistoric human civilization, had fully formed and had started expanding their empire, colonizing planets all along the Orion arm of the Milky Way galaxy. Humanity grew fast over the years, but their power in the galaxy was nothing compared to the Forerunners and their empire at the time. Because of how big of an empire the Forerunners had, humanity decided to grow on their own, and eventually built up their own empire of at least 20,000 worlds in 1,000 systems. The Didact, a higher up member of the Forerunners, stated that he felt humanity was the second greatest military power within the galaxy, and could be their biggest rival if things were to go that way. As the humans continued their expansion over the next 40,000 years, they would encounter the extremely smart and technologically advanced species of the Sanshaum around the year of 110,000 BCE, and bring them into an alliance to continue expanding the humans' empire, producing technology that could easily rival that of the Forerunners. Their main base for the alliance was on the planet of Sharum Hakor, where they would build themselves up and develop their technologies. The more they grew, however, the more the Forerunners became fearful of them, with the Didact seeing humanity as one of the most conscientious, bigoted and self-centered species in the galaxy, and should be watched at all times. But as the human empire continued to expand out into the Milky Way galaxy, they would go on to encounter an automated cargo ship that was of unknown origin to both humans and the Sanshaum. The ship was said to have come from one of the Magellanic clouds, and crashed on some of the planets near the edge of the galaxy. When finding the ship, there was no crew, no sign of any intelligent life form. It seemed to be completely abandoned. However, investigating further, the humans would find transparent cylinders filled with a mysterious unknown powder. Bringing it back to their labs to analyze, the humans would initially find that the powder was completely harmless and served no real purpose. The only thing the humans found from this powder was that it was composed of lifeless, short-chain organic molecules, and because of this, the humans had a new idea of how they would test it to see what it was capable of. Here they would test the powder on the small domesticated animal called the Feru, which both the humans and the Sanshaum chose as their favourite household pet. Once again, the powder seemed pretty harmless at first, and once again wasn't showing any signs of doing anything in particular to the Feru. However, after some time it became clear that this powder was composed of the terrifying Flood's genetic material, and started to mutate the Feru, altering its genome, and started using it to create its own Flood supercell, the main source of all Flood biomass across the galaxy. As the mutations started to happen within the Feru, it would start turning them into basic Flood forms, with fleshy tentacle-like rods sticking out of their body. With the Feru population being infected, the Flood would start passing the infection onto both humanity and the Sanshaum, because of the fact that they kept these creatures as pets on their homeworlds. The Flood had now started to spread, and both humanity and the Sanshaum had to act quickly. The Flood had now begun the feral phase. Word spread slowly to the high command command of the human empire, and by the time word had got there about what the powder really was and what it was capable of, human planets were fully infected, and the flood had started to completely ravage everything they could get their hands on. Humans had to retreat from their part of space and ventured into Forerunner-controlled space to escape the terrifying flood infections. The humans immediately started taking over Forerunner worlds to make up for the planets they had lost to the flood, but also to try and get 2 steps ahead of their new enemy. The humans started setting up quarantine zones as well for all those infected with the flood, including the Sanshayum. However, these quarantine attempts were to fail, as the flood would go on to continue taking everything from the human empire. But humanity had one plan to try and get rid of the flood infection once and for all. Here the leaders took a third of the population and genetically altered them, inserting specific genes that were designed to fight flood biomass. After the third of the population were altered by their leaders, they were then fed to the flood. Despite being a massive unethical practice, this experiment actually worked, as the genes started aggressively killing off the biomatter, destroying almost all of the flood they had encountered. Humanity had won, but at what cost? The flood appeared to be destroyed completely. However, they were wrong. Some still survived, and like humanity had just done, they had started to go into hiding to ensure their survival. To the human empire, the flood was seen as gone for good. Their cure had worked, or so they thought, because 9,000 years later the flood would return, and in much greater force. This was ultimately their plan, to do a tactical retreat. However, before humanity came up with what they thought was the cure, the Forerunners had a different view on why the humans were there in the first place. Unaware of why humanity was actually there in the first place, believing they were just aggressively expanding their empire as they would just invade the planet, the Forerunners hit back at humanity and declared war against them, not understanding the flood was the bigger threat in all of this. Humanity during their move into the Forerunner space had been completely wiping out all of the species on the planet which had been resettled there by the Forerunners. This was simply a command made by the Lord of Admirals, who wanted to sterilize planets to make sure the flood infestations could not expand any further out. But to the Forerunners, the flood was not a true threat, and instead that was seen as more of humanity's arrogance and aggression to show their overall strength. During these tactics by the Lord of Admirals, the humans would also go on to kill millions of defenseless Forerunners in the process, making the Forerunner commanders extremely angry about what they were witnessing. As stated, the Forerunners did not see the flood as a problem like the humans did, so didn't understand why this could be happening. It had to just be human aggression, and that was it. The Forerunners immediately started hitting them where it hurt, attacking humanity's colonies hard, with their first being the homeworld of Urda, now known as Earth. This was a huge blow to humanity's morale, and they could not be dealing with a war on both fronts. Humanity couldn't hit back at the Forerunners' homeworld, however, as they never got close to venturing into the Forerunner Orion complex, only managing to get up to 15,000 light years from it. After this initial blow to humanity, the Didact came up with a new plan. Here he initiated the Star Hopping plan, where Forerunner fleets would only do strategic jumps to important human worlds to attack them, ignoring lesser ones, making sure humanity was hit hard and fast, whilst the Forerunners could conserve their resources and just fight efficiently. During this two-front war, however, humanity desperately sought answers for controlling the flood. A few scientists would encounter the ancient species of the Primordial, located on Cherim Hakor. The researchers knew it had the answers they needed and questioned it about the flood. However, the answers they received were so horrific, the scientists couldn't continue to live, and immediately committed suicide rather than live with that knowledge. The truth was, the precursors were the Forerunners' oldest enemy. The precursors were the ones who told the Forerunners they could not hold the mantle of responsibility, and were outright refused this fate, stating that the mantle would be passed down to humanity. The Forerunners, outraged by this, defeated all the precursors despite them being far more advanced than them, as the precursors were a tier 0 civilization, meaning they were transcendent beings, the theoretical ceiling for technological achievement. A few of the precursors survived, however, and started coming up with a plan for their survival. Here they decided that a few of them would take into the form of a desiccated powder. That powder being the one the humans found. The dust was meant to bring the precursors back to their original form and bring back the age of the precursors. However, over time they would become flawed and corrupted, and would mean that all they could do was bring about a cancerous plague and death everywhere they went. With their betrayal in the back of their mind, the precursors, now corrupted, sought out after their creations and embraced their new selves, and sought out to create new life within the galaxy. That new life being in the form of the Flood, and that all life would go on to know only suffering and would never have a chance to rebel against their makers again. But for this, they needed humanity if they were to hit back against their creations. As humanity used their genetically altered population to destroy what they thought was the full Flood infection, their forces were spread incredibly thin, losing over 1/3 of their population, and their allies of the Sanshayum losing a ton of their population as well. However, this was an even bigger problem considering they were still at war against the Forerunners, who had been obliterating human worlds all over the galaxy. Both the Flood and the Forerunners had run the human resources right down, and their morale was again at an all-time low. Despite this, however, humanity was still able to hold up on their own and fend off against the Forerunner forces, despite how many were thrown at them. This was all thanks to humanity's political and morale commander, who encouraged humans to study Forerunner technologies from their earlier conflicts with them. However, the war was nearing its end, and humanity's end was soon approaching. The Didact with his warrior servants and naval fleets were able to push humanity back to their planet of Cherim-Hakor, where both humanity and the Sanshayum alliance was based. The human empire was now cut off as this mammoth fleet invaded them, but the humans were smart and had gathered precursor technology and used it to create formidable fortifications capable of standing out against the strongest fleets in the galaxy. With the humans and the Sanshayum using this old technology made from the once massively advanced species of the precursors, they were able to construct unbending filaments, helping them link their orbital platforms to help boost their defenses even more. Because of this incredible technology at their disposal, humanity was able to defend themselves from the overwhelming Didact forces, with humanity holding off the Forerunner forces for over 50 years, being attacked constantly. But eventually humanity couldn't defend anymore. There was no way they could call in reinforcements to help them fend off this devastating force of the Didact's fleets. This was also helped by the fact that during this conflict, the Sanshayum commander agreed to a secret deal with the Forerunners behind the humans' back to soften their punishment for the war, stripping them of their technologies and placing their homeworld under quarantine if they surrendered now. With this surrender, they also gave the Forerunners permission to gain access to the Cherim-Hakor defenses. With the Sanshayum turning their back on humanity, the Forerunners were able to breach what was at first believed to be impregnable security and land on the planet. Eventually, thanks to the Sanshayum betrayal, humanity fell after just 3 years of ground combat. Some of the remaining forces fighting against the Forerunners took the easy way out and committed suicide, as they felt it was the more honourable way to go out instead of tortured by the Forerunners and held as prisoners. The human empire had now officially fallen, and the Forerunners were victorious in the Human-Forerunner War. Whilst humanity showed their strength for a long time against two different foes, their numbers were too low to even stand a chance against them, as they had their final stand at Cherim-Hakor. The Didact during this war had lost all of his children during it, and was set on eradicating humanity from all of existence, something he set about doing for thousands of years. With humanity defeated, the Forerunners tore down everything of prehistoric human civilization. Humans were being executed in their masses for starting the conflict and being supposedly naturally violent and overly aggressive. With most of the humans being wiped out, the remaining individuals would be sent back to their homeworlds and were stripped of all their technology and genetically pushed back to around the Stone Age of evolution, as well as splintering off into subspecies such as the Florians. The humans would have been completely executed and made extinct after what they had ultimately done to the Forerunner planets, but the sudden disappearance of the Flood made the Forerunners believe the humans truly had found a cure for it, and kept them alive to study their genetics to work out what the cure was. But their de-evolution and stripping of technology was ultimately their punishment for starting the war. The Sanshayum were punished as well, but not nearly as much as humanity due to the deal they signed with the Forerunners. Their homeworld was shut off from all other life forms and placed under quarantine, with a Forerunner military fortress orbiting the planet. They would be experimented on in the coming years and used as test subjects for the Forerunners to further their existence because of the return of the Flood. And as for the Flood, they were still in hiding while the Forerunners were now fully aware of how deadly they truly were, but confused where they had gone and why they were in what they thought was hiding. The Forerunners truly believed the humans had come up with the cure to stop the Flood from spreading, but now with them gone and their technology erased, they had to work out what it was by studying the species they were once warring with. The humans remaining on their planet of Churum Hakor would have their minds extracted via composers and cycled through a rote of interrogation for thousands of years, hoping to find the memories, to find this cure for the Flood. Eventually, many within the Forerunner ranks, including the librarian, would start questioning if there really was a cure for the Flood, with her suggesting something else was at play regarding their retreat into the stars. Eventually, it was figured out that the Flood's retreat was indeed planned, done for the purpose of preserving humanity from destruction at the Forerunners' hands, and for the purpose of wasting the Forerunners' time and resources in the desperate hunt for the supposed cure that ultimately didn't exist. With this being figured out, the Flood, after waiting for 9,000 years, would attack with their vast numbers, triggering the devastating war known as the Forerunner Flood War that would see the firing of the Halo Rings and the resetting of all life, including humans, and the rebuilding of the galaxy, ultimately leading to more wars and the return of everything that once was 100,000 years ago, with humans fighting back against the Flood once again whilst also dealing with a new third party of the Covenant, led by their once allies, the Sanshayum. Over the many years, humanity defended themselves from the overwhelming threat of the Forerunners, who were angry at humanity's supposed aggression for taking over their worlds, destroying their natural life they had been preserving, and setting up their colonies on the Forerunner planets. But if the Forerunners just knew why humanity had turned up, why they were running, and realistically how deadly the Flood were to start with, the two species could have joined together, fought back against the Flood, and hopefully wiped them from existence. And if they could find a way to destroy them, could eventually go on to help each other to rebuild their worlds and maybe develop them both into tier 0 of technological achievements. Instead, the Forerunners would have to fight against the Flood alone in a war they could never win. The Human-Forerunner War was the end of an era for humanity and the Sanshayum. It was the turning point for the galaxy that would lead to the modern-day events of the current universe, and ultimately the war and near extinction of a whole species was due to one miscommunication and misjudgment between humanity and the Forerunners. Will humanity and the remaining Forerunners ever join forces together in the future, or will the events of the past ever be made up between the two factions to help each other fight back against the potential of the Flood or even the precursors returning? Only time can really tell. And that is the relatively short story of the Human-Forerunner War, the end of the human empire, as well as the Human-Sanshayum alliance, as well as the start of the Forerunner Flood War that would reset the whole galaxy. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and do let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. If you did enjoy this video, do leave a like, a nice comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you really like this video and channel, why not support me on Patreon or as a YouTube channel member for early access to these videos, as well as them being completely ad-free. And speaking of, I'd like to thank my supporters real quick. Big thanks to our small fish guys, our big fishes, Duquesne23, Sacrum, Rhino Head, Eddie, Christopher, Andrew, Last Persona User, and Arto Creme, our sharks, the AVP Man and Connor, and our huge megalodons, Sinus, Jacob Garcia, Wow Such Gaming, Chernobyl Stalker, Shadow SGT, and Ryan Everett. Also big shout out to our YouTube channel members, our Wise Ones Jambu and Fiery Italian, as well as all my amazing subscribers over on Twitch. All your support means the world to me and means I can make these videos for you guys, so thank you all so much. But that is all for now. Thanks again for watching, and I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.